Oops. Okay, well, we accidentally just did that. How do I? hmm I was in the meeting later with Maxine and Brad and everyone else. And the plan is Maxine has a definite ending of 7:30. So we have a strict 2 hours. And so we're going to tackle those two topics, as Matt was saying. And then they were thinking that since inclusionary zoning was such a big topic, that maybe Matt could just do like a brief intro and have everybody read that memo, and just really prepare for that next one, and schedule it either at the end of that meeting or sometime shortly after.
Okay, good. Yeah, that sounds fine, and we'll probably get better feedback from the other members of the commission if they have some time to think about it. So yeah, I'll just plan to do that. Make a quick presentation.
I have a question about this.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what about accessory dwelling units? Have we already settled that? Are we already?
We presented it, as you know, at the last workshop, and got some feedback. And I think there's some revision to be done to that memo based on the feedback that we got. But the feedback was largely, thumbs up, sounds good, and a few tweaks. So
so we've already that's already been done. We've put that through the committee process. It's ready to be taken to the full planning commission. So all we have left is inclusionary zoning.
Well, inclusionary zoning, and then the stuff we've been talking about, which I think goes a little bit beyond inclusionary zoning, the missing middle stuff, duplexes, triplexes, minimum lot sizes, et cetera. Sorry, okay. Go ahead, Alice. Robin.
So those other things that we have been talking about, and I want to continue talking about, aren't necessarily like part of the initial main charge. So I guess what I'm getting at is I'm not sure why we can't talk about 3 things tomorrow night hours, but staff can obviously knows more than I do about this, so I'll stop talking.
I think they're just foreseeing that it will take a long while, and they don't want to plan for too much and then it not go all the way through, as things can take a little while in joint planning commission sessions, as you all know. Though one thing Brad did want me to double check with y'all was about minimum home sizes. I know that for ADUs, we had decided that building code would dictate that. But he was just curious as to whether or not we'd decided that for homes as well, just like single family residences.
I think we're going to talk about that, right, Matt?
So you're talking about not minimum lot sizes, Robin, right. Correct? But minimum square footage for homes.
Right.
Is that right?
Because the mayor's charge had those 4 points for us, and the first one was the greenfield development with the infill setbacks. The second was the minimum home sizes, square footage for single family homes. The other 2 were ADU and inclusionary zoning. So we're just trying to make sure that everything's, like wrapping up for those 4 points before we move on to more of the missing middle, etc.
Sure. Now, here's what I remember. I don't believe that we've decided to completely eliminate a minimum square footage requirement for new single-family homes. I think we had, in the context of talking about ADUs, we learned from the building inspector that there's a state statute that was passed that is, I'm blanking on the terminology, but it's a statute that localities are permitted to adopt but not required to, so it doesn't override.
It's basically uniform code language that I think he was talking about, right? And he was specifically talking about.
It would allow. That's right. That would allow single family homes to be built as small as it was something like, or it would allow I think it was like 400 square feet or something like that, something crazy small that nobody would actually ever build.
Yeah.
But it was still a number. It was not a just let it go to the building code. And I think in our ADU memo, we expressed an interest in suggesting to the mayor and commission that they consider adopting that state uniform statute language. And that's, I think, as far as we took it. Does anyone?
Matt, I'm
Robin,
kind of remembering that a little bit differently, and that doesn't, I don't necessarily trust my memory on that one, but I thought what I heard him say is that there was uniform code language that could be, that had been written specifically kind of defining tiny houses.
Mm-hmm.
And then my memory of the conversation was also that and that if there was a number that came up, that it was, something really small, because it was really around tiny houses. That was a conversation around actually sort of these super small homes. But I guess I remember it a little bit differently in that my takeaway from it was that we could, I remember coming away from the conversation thinking I would be totally comfortable removing minimum home sizes generally after what I heard him say, not just for ADUs, but in general, because I felt comfortable that the building codes would sort of address the safety concerns of super small houses. And so that's how I remember it. But, I'd love to hear how other people remember it, but I definitely, that was I don't know if I'm superimposing on that sort of a belief or sense that I have about it, or I just didn't hear him say that there needed to be a number, because I remember specifically asking him, I wanted to know from a sort of administrative standpoint on their end, if it was easier for them to issue certificates of occupancy, or that it was easier for them to sort of manage it when they had a number to work with. And thinking that he might say, yeah, it's easier for us if we just have a square footage. And he didn't say that. Mm-hmm. He said that that building safety codes would sort of take care of it. So, I think there's real, when I don't know if we're talking about now, if we will be, but I'm very interested in the idea of removing minimum home sizes. I don't see the point of them yet or anymore. I would be interested to hear if there's a good argument to be made for that in 2020. Or if there was a good argument, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm going to just suggest, I think this whole meeting will flow a little easier if somebody who can see people raising their hands, somebody who has video, chairs the meeting. So, Sarah, I think you're our vice chair or whatever of the committee. Do you mind just being the one to call on people? Because I don't want to talk over somebody who's raising their hand who I can't see.
Sure.
But I share your general skepticism of the idea that we need them, given that to a large extent, the market will dictate that somebody who's paid a certain amount of money for land is not likely to then build a 300 square foot house on that land. But,
right.
If somebody felt like that was what they needed to do, I'm not sure why the zoning code ought to stand in their way.
Yeah. Jeff? You're muted.
Yeah, here we go. I was going to say when Matt says that, I'm thinking, yes, that's probably correct. The market will govern sometimes is a scary word, but I think that in this case, if I was living, especially in a tight neighborhood, if a guy wants to build a smaller house rather than a larger house, yeah, knock yourself out. So, and the trend is certainly seems to be, we hear a lot of talk about smaller homes that people want. So I don't think you could make one too small and still be a house that you could live in. So I think that's a fair assumption, is just let the the minimums of a definition of a home and not necessarily make it a zoning item.
Just to clarify,
Go for it, Alice.
just to clarify, we're talking about minimum home sizes, not minimum lot sizes.
Yeah, and I just double
Correct.
checked on our charge. And our charge actually, on the housing side, our charge says minimum home sizes. Technically, the land use subcommittee is supposed to consider minimum residential lot sizes. So I'm kind of hearing us all agree that we would be in favor of recommending to the mayor and commission that we do away with them in residential zones. Is that what you guys are hearing too?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we've discussed it and checked it off the list.
Matt, did you get my email? I think it was yesterday. I know you've been.
Yeah, well, with your memo, I was just going to ask you to talk about that to the committee about the greenfield development height standards.
Yeah.
That you flagged in that. Yeah.
Right. And so that's the first point. And we sort of talked about that the very first meeting, which feels very long ago to me. And that's just essentially saying that when someone creates like a new neighborhood through a preliminary plat, which is anything that's more than 2 acres or more and at least 5 lots, that they won't have to follow the infill height standards, because that design of going through that subdivision process sort of already dictates that they just sort of have their own style and feel already without those infill height standards. And it just seems to be, I'm struggling to think of the word, but it just causes more of a problem. So I think the idea is that removing those standards in neighborhoods where they're already not really needed, that already have a distinct style to them, might help reduce costs. And it was sort of thrown on there as the first point, I think, to try and be easy. Hence why we did it in the first meeting pretty quickly. But yeah, Jeff, did you put your hand up?
I did, and I was gonna, yeah, I agree with that. I remember talking about this, and my thought at the time was, if you're building a subdivision, by definition, it matches itself, and you're not building something undesirable next to somebody who's already established, and so the neighborhood is what the neighborhood is, and you're buying into the whole neighborhood at that point. So that does make sense to me.
Right. And on that preliminary plat, they have to list those setbacks. So all of the lots have like a uniform setback anyway, or like a uniform set of setbacks that they adhere to.
So they still would have to comply with, conform to height restrictions and things like that, but just not the ones that are set out in the infill standards.
Right. Yep.
And this applies, am I understanding correctly, Robin? When we say greenfield development, we mean not just something greater than 2 acres, but also something that's previously undeveloped. Like if there were, if somebody had 5 adjacent lots and 5 points that added up to more than 2 acres, but only had like a couple houses on them, and they wanted to redevelop that property in a different way, would that qualify as a greenfield, or would that be subject to the ordinary infill height standards?
I think that would be subject to infill.
Okay.
Yeah.
So greenfield does mean, like, I suppose it doesn't mean entirely undeveloped, because oftentimes you see, like, we're talking a little bit on the outskirts, and it might be a multi-acre property with 1 house on it, and that would still be a greenfield if they're doing a subdivision on that, tearing down the old house. Okay. Okay. Just to be sure I understood the scope.
Yep.
Robin, did you say for 2 acres or more, or was it more than 5 lots or less than 5 lots, or 5 lots or less?
5 lots or more. So in the infill standards, those are sort of defined as it has to meet both of those qualifications for it to have those green fill standards, like more than 2 acres, and has to be creating 5 lots or more.
Okay, great. So Matt, were you thinking then that we would talk, since we may have just kind of knocked out the minimum lot size question, or I'm sorry, minimum house size question. Were you thinking that tonight we would talk about the inclusionary zoning memo, or that we would talk about the missing middle housing typologies and sort of the idea of doing something that would encourage gentle density?
Yeah, I had intended the latter with the caveat that, because I didn't give y'all very much time to look at the inclusionary zoning memo, given there are what I understood to be the need to get it to the whole planning commission in time for them to review it before the workshop. But now that it becomes clear that Maxine and I had different understandings of the agenda, I think inclusionary zoning, we could talk about it here, or if you guys want to just email comments and I can revise as needed that memo and send around an updated version. We can do it that way so that we can talk about missing middle now, or if anybody has a point that they're just burning to make about the inclusionary zoning topic, by all means, if there's something that would benefit from verbal discussion, then let's do that. So I'll just defer to you guys and your feelings about where you're at on inclusionary zoning.
I thought the memo was fantastic, but that maybe we want to address Jim's point that he brought up in the email. But otherwise, other than Jim's point that he brought up, I feel really comfortable with the memo as it reads.
I do jump in
Robin.
Quickly to say that Brad's a little worried about staff capacity for the rest of the year, with all the things going through with like the HPC and some other things that are in the works, and wrapping all this up to get to the mayor, etc. So we can definitely look at missing middle stuff, but we might not have staff coordinated meetings going forward, just because there's a lot for us to do on the back end for a few other things. So more than happy to talk about these things, but we probably won't resume these until at least the beginning of next year, or just trying to get all those like 8 points into something to pass off, just like dropping that in there. And I'm sure Brad will talk to you more about that tomorrow. It was just something that was sort of mentioned earlier in that meeting.
I think that's really good to know, and this is a good group to have to begin a missing middle conversation with. But it is good to know that really we're going to have staff support through what we've already done, and not beyond that. So we might want to consider, the future of these discussions.
Yeah.
Okay, so Robin, just to be sure I understood that. So when you say we may not be having staff-supported meetings going forward, you mean after this one that we're having right now, or is there a date in the future after which Brad thinks we may not be able to keep doing this?
So I think if we've wrapped up our 4 points, he's sort of wanting these meetings to end sooner rather than later. He had mentioned to Maxine that he thought tonight might be our last meeting, but I think, he hasn't been to them. But yes, so I just don't want us to tackle too much right now. I think y'all are doing great work, but I also don't want y'all to do a lot of work that might not go anywhere until 2021. So that's just something to be mindful of. And I think a lot of these process questions definitely need to be addressed to Brad tomorrow. Just because I feel like we've got a lot going on, and I'm not entirely sure of all of it, because thankfully I'm not the director. But so I think that's sort of the idea, if that is helpful.
Well, what I would say is just kind of, I'm thinking about the email that Mark sent us a few days back that had some pretty substantive stuff about duplex ideas and design code. He sent that on the 4th. And it might be that if we, want to squeeze in a bit of a conversation, like the fact that Mark has put some work into that, I don't know how that exactly kind of jives with what you're saying, Robin. But I take from that it makes, I think what Mark was trying to do was to support that we generally seem to be in favor of allowing duplexes in RS 5, 8, and 15. And he had recommended, like, I think that we've actually already talked about that a bit. And like when Mark presented that use chart showing that we could, show duplex as a P use in, I think we talked about the 5, 8, and 15. I feel like we've laid the groundwork, and then Mark has sent some supportive information that it seems good to seize on now. So yeah, I'm not sure if what you're saying, Mark, is that Brad is saying, like, from a staff standpoint, they can only really afford the time to incorporate in recommendations to the mayor and commission about these 4 points. But I would like to push for, I would be very interested in seeing if we can push this 5th one in there. If we have a recommendation, just kind of seeing that Mark, because there might be a fairly,
Yeah, I mean,
stuck on, yeah, go ahead.
Has gone.
Yeah. And I think what we got a little bit or start thinking about, and I think why Mark did some of the work that he did, is we sort of talked about the idea of you got to be pretty careful if you're just going to suddenly allow duplexes, because you do want to, you don't want, we were all kind of referring to some pretty unattractive duplexes there that kind of come off the spokes off of Lexington Road, and how to craft that in a way that makes, that makes that less of how that could turn out. So I don't know. So I guess what I'm just saying is I feel like I don't know who had time to look at what what Mark sent. But I really like the idea of including something like that in our recommendations. Go for it, Alice.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it really fairly straightforward. We strongly recommend that the mayor and commission send back to us however they do it. They assign to us the job of looking at duplexes in single family neighborhoods. I'm very much in favor of them and think they can work beautifully. But we're under a bit of time pressure. So let's and I think we've accomplished a lot, by the way, in a very small amount of time, relatively speaking. But let's definitely add as part of the report that in to meet the goals that the initial mayor's charge asked for, we recommend that you send this back to us.
Yeah, sorry, my internet just went out. I also realized I was interrupting Sarah. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Alice had just added to what I said. Did you hear what she said?
I did.
Yeah, you did. Okay, good. Because one thing we could say is, in general, the committee discussed the notion of that we're in favor of finding ways to allow duplexes in some residential zones, but we would like, the opportunity, or we would like to be tasked with, going into that further. And, I think that being really clear on that with them so that we could get the task to continue.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I agree completely with Sarah that I think we've already done some work and made some decisions on the duplex topic that I think are appropriate for us to finish up and include in what we send to the mayor and commission, and that I think we can do without too terribly much work. And I think I've always understood Mayor Gertz's initial charge to us to, the examples he gives are, about grading schedule, road interconnectivity, height restrictions, and greenfields. Those are given as examples, not as an exhaustive list. And we've talked about that before. I think it's very clear that the overall charge is for us to develop policies and practices that will encourage mixed income development across zones, allowing for single family and multifamily residential units. And then it says this should include, and it gives a bunch of examples. But I think, I don't know that we, just as a sort of point of procedure, I don't know that we need to recommend to the mayor and commission that they ask us to work on duplexes before it's proper for us to present them what we've already done on duplexes. Because I think what Mayor Gertz asked us to do absolutely already includes allowing for multifamily residential units. I mean, I'm quoting from it. I'm looking at it on my screen right now. So I think it's already before us, and I think the work we've done on it was done with that in mind. So I don't think we need additional marching orders to wrap that up and send it to them. Although by all means, if they want more detailed follow-up, they can certainly send it back to us with requests that we do more.
Matt, if I can, just on the procedural issues here, I guess what I'm saying is that we actually do want to do more work on this done. I agree. Let's put everything into our whatever into the planning commission that then goes up to the mayor commission. What I'm saying is that I would like for us to make a recommendation that they send a duplex ordinance back. That they're not going to do that by themselves. They'll want planning commission to be involved in that. So we're just asking for a thing for our work program. Does that make sense?
I think it does. That we would present to them what we've done, which is not as specific as an ordinance, and then suggest that if they are on board generally with the idea of authorizing duplexes and single-family zones, that we stand ready to develop a draft ordinance on that, or to do whatever else related to that they ask us to do.
And maybe even slightly more strongly worded committee, and we'll see if the planning commission agrees. We strongly support the development of an ordinance that would introduce duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes into single-family zones. Asking you to agree with us and send it back to us. That's kind of the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I think we may be more or less on the same page. But I think it's perfectly appropriate for us to package up the work we've already done on that, and to present to them our recommendation that they ought to authorize duplexes, and that may or may not require them to send it back to us. It may be that what we send them is sufficient for them to send something to the attorney and say, we'd like to just put this in an ordinance. Because I think with the stuff that we had done on it already, and the work that Mark did gathering stuff, I think we're very close to that point anyway. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'll just put one final point on that. I think. I'll just add one final point. I think you and I do almost entirely agree on this, but I do think you're overly optimistic on its own without our further involvement in something as big as allowing duplexes in residential zones.
That is, you're undoubtedly right that I'm overly optimistic. You're not the first person to tell me that about this or many other topics. So yeah, I'm sure that is probably correct.
So maybe we should, like, does it make sense for us to talk about, I guess, like is it too detailed to talk about what the wording of that would be at this point in the game in terms of how that would be presented to them, that element? Or we, of course, don't have anything written up about minimum house sizes either.
I don't think that that's too detailed. And I think with or without, I hear what Robin's saying, that Brad may feel as though staff is in a position where they need to stop providing support for these meetings. But I think we've talked from the get-go about that the mayor's given us, the planning commission, a charge of topics to work on, and we've been working away on that. And I'm all for what you just said, Sarah. I think we should continue to work on that. And if I absolutely respect that staff has a ton of other stuff going on and may not be able to host these meetings. And I guess that's just a topic that maybe a planning commission we can talk about tomorrow. Whether that necessarily means that the planning commission can't keep working on these topics until staff is able to get back into the game, or if if we can continue working on duplexes and other related topics with or without staff support.
Yeah. Matt, I keep thinking you can see me and I nod. I think we're all doing that. It's hard to be the person running the meeting when you're calling in. Robin, so yeah, I guess this applies both to the duplex, essentially, I don't know if recommendation is the right word, but essentially we want to recommend, we are in favor of this idea and want to be given the opportunity to explore it further. Is that sort of the gist of what we're saying?
I mean, that's what it sounds like you're saying. Like I said, I think this really is like a process question for Brad, as far as like how he wants to tackle it, especially because there has been so much work put into it. And I feel like if I had to wager a guess, one thing that he might say is that if we can wrap it up within a meeting or two, but I don't know. I know that part of the reason that we started back at work this week was there was just too much to tackle. Hence why we're all back in the office. So it's really just up to his discretion. And I know it's not a fun answer. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, I guess, yeah. So with regard to both that point as well as the, I feel like ADUs and inclusionary zoning, Matt wrote up these memos and, we have a lot more to say about those two. I think we have just we have a more succinct recommendation about minimum house sizes going away. But we don't, is that something staff will write up, or how should we proceed with that? As well as the recommendation on duplex about wanting to be reassigned duplex stuff.
I'm not sure how the duplex stuff will go, if we're honest, but yeah, staff will talk about how to do that code for the minimum home sizes, because I think that's just held in one code section in 915. So it might just be as easy as removing that code section or just altering it, because it does mention dwelling unit sizes within RM that have to be a minimum of 450, but obviously that's not what we're talking about here. So it would either just be removing that first part of text that says, homes have to be 600 with an RS5 and then 1,000 for everything else, or getting rid of that section or doing something like that. But yeah, that's something that staff can definitely handle.
Okay. So, and Robin, you had sent me some draft language regarding this greenfield height standards thing and exactly where the ordinance would need to be revised on that. And that seems straightforward. And what you just said sounds straightforward. So yeah, if you guys want to take the lead on finalizing language on that, I think that we're all on the same page on those two things.
Great. I just also keep nodding at you. Sorry about that.
That's quite all right.
Jeff, are you raising your hand? Oh, you're muted. So, okay. Jeff is not raising his hand. Well, then I don't know what do we need to talk about the point that Jim brought up in his email with regard to the inclusionary zoning question? I think that was primarily related to being concerned that there could be a legal issue with regard to whether the government has an ownership interest in land. Is that what you were saying, Jim?
Yes, the law is quite explicit on that point. It says that this code section shall not be construed as prohibiting any county or municipal corporation or any authority created by a county corporation or municipal corporation for that purpose from regulating in any way property belonging to such county, such municipal corporation or such authority from entering into any agreements with private persons. I think this was written very tightly with a specific intent of preventing such agreements unless it was land already owned by the county. And you're going to find those folks, they're probably anti-government activism, and they're going to try to throw a monkey wrench into it. So I think we need to seriously consider looking at talking to legislators about modifying the law to make it a little bit more favorable. Because if we don't, if we get this whole thing off the ground, then they come in and come down with a hammer, we're dead in the water with nowhere to go.
Jim, I'm appreciated your comment, but I wasn't sure, and I'm still not 100% sure I understand the concern. And I'm looking right now in my email for that, where Mark forwarded us.
Yeah, well,
Jim,
that's what I just read from.
Well, so I'm looking at your email, but the very beginning of what you said the law said, is that in here? Or did
Yes,
it
it specifically gives you a way out if the government or an authority owns the property that this agreement is going to be made on. And we're not going to be owning it in most cases. It would be
gives who the way
economically
out?
feasible.
Who does it give the way out? The property owner or the?
It gives the way out to the municipality or municipal corporation or authority, county municipal corporation or authority. It gives that authority, it does not restrict it if they own the property. And that is a very rare instance. It's a very, very narrow possibility. We're not going to be owning most of the property that these agreements are trying to be negotiated on. And so I read it as being consistent with our former county attorney's interpretation that we can't do it.
So the thing that you just read to us, that was the law, I didn't.
That is in the code, paragraph 44-7-19, regulation of rents.
And that's in the Georgia code?
Yes.
What was it, 24-what, 19?
44-7-19.
And Mark forwarded us a PDF of that Sherry had sent to him. So it's in your email after our last meeting. Sherry sent it around so that we could all read it.
Okay.
So I
Okay,
would
so I'm looking at that now.
like
So,
to interpret
Jim,
it otherwise, but I think the people who wrote this know what they're doing, and they're trying to prevent it from happening. I would also add that part of that paragraph is rather hazy in meaning because of the fact that it essentially, from regulating in any way property belonging to such county, such municipal corporation, or such authority, from entering into any agreement with private persons. But if nothing else, the law is vague and therefore hard to figure out the exact meaning of. That would be really our only hope of hanging on. But I think it was put in that form primarily to prevent it from happening, except in very rare instances.
Jim, let me just say this. I do find the statute a little bit vague. I think your reading of it may or may not be correct. And Sherry's opinion was that the way that the statute has been interpreted is a municipality is free to enter into an agreement with private persons regarding their property. And so, you know, I think this is certainly, I don't know that we need to suggest to the Mayor and Commission that they go.
But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say property of private individuals. It says property of the county, municipal, corporation, or authority.
But it's saying,
It says two things.
I'm getting the opposite from it. Like, I see that it's saying this code shall not be construed as prohibiting. In other words, this code does not prohibit any county or municipal corporation from regulating property that belongs to the county either. Or from, it doesn't prohibit.
It says if the county owns it, we'll let it go. But if the county doesn't own it, I take it as meaning that it's not allowed to do it.
No, I mean, we could bring it up to them, but I see that, I don't read it the same way at all. I think it's saying it doesn't prohibit a county from entering into any agreements with private persons. It's saying specifically, it shall not be construed as prohibiting, which is a lawyerly speak for it doesn't.
Yes, but it says
right. I interpret it the same way that Sarah does, and also Sherry.
Keep going, Matt.
Okay, I interpret it the same way that Sarah does, and I took from our meeting with Sherry that she does too. So I think at this point, all we need to do is perhaps, you know, I can add a footnote or something in the memo that says, you know, county council expressed their opinion that private agreements with private developers were permissible to accomplish this, and you know, and I'll cite the statute, and you know, and perhaps suggest that they may want to just get a ironclad opinion on that from county council. But it's weirdly written. I feel like there's an or missing. You know, the syntax of it is a little peculiar, but I don't know that we need to reach a final decision about what we think it means, because I think we have the county council whose job it is to give us that opinion. We already have her opinion on that.
Yeah, I agree. If there were a comma or from entering into any agreements with private persons, it would be unambiguous. But that's not there.
Yeah, so it sounds like you disagree with Sherry, and you're right, but I don't know that we need to resolve who's right on that now. It's just the American Commission can take that for what it's worth, and I'll add something to the memo about it.
My main point is that we need to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, or we may get our ground cut out from under us.
Yeah,
and
well
especially
taken. And I'll add a footnote to that effect.
Constructionist judges, they're going to strictly construe it and say that's the only circumstance where you can get away with it.
I think also, I mean, this could, if you do put a footnote about it, Matt, she included this as because it's actually the statute that, that she believes and that many people believe is the reason you can't have a mandatory program, because this is essentially a statute that is saying you can't have rent control in the state of Georgia. So in some ways it's a relevant footnote to the why we're choosing to recommend include voluntary over mandatory.
Right, and yeah, there are many ways to solve a problem like this. And I think Sherry's point is, if a developer makes the choice, you know, they have a right to build 200 bedrooms per acre, and they make a choice to agree to something in order to be able to build 300 bedrooms per acre. They may not even have legal standing to raise an objection to that agreement after the fact. So I think, you know, there are multiple reasons why it's probably not going to be litigated and decided against us, including that a developer who has agreed, you know, as a condition of that agreement can be required to waive any lawsuit to the contrary, you know. So yeah. Obviously they only opt into doing it if it's economically profitable for them to do it, and so I think there's not going to be anybody in a position to object or who's dissatisfied with it.
Yeah. But I mean, other than Jim bringing that one point up, I like the memo. I like the way you captured the discussion about exactly what you just said, the need for this to be actually attractive to developers and sort of the economics of it. So I think that's great.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'll make those tweaks. And if you guys have any other thoughts on the memo, you know, minor or major, that you just want to email me, I'm happy to make additional tweaks and email it around to the Planning Commission, because it sounds like our full group discussion of it's going to be, you know, in the future, in the next a couple of weeks, maybe down the road. And so there's time to make some revisions, and I'll put in Jim's point and anything else that you guys send me that you think I should add to it.
Sarah, it's a really good memo, and I just appreciate your ability to sum these complex discussions up in such a way that I'm like, yeah, that's what we said. So thank you.
My pleasure, and thank you. So one thing I had regarding the stuff that Mark sent around, and Sarah, if you think it's since you're leading the meeting, if you had mentioned wanting to talk about that, if you think there's other stuff to talk about before we get to that, but I did have a question for y'all about Mark's duplex materials.
No, I think that sounds great.
Okay, so one of the things he sent around was from Jonesboro's design guidelines for duplexes and triplexes. And as we talked about it, it seemed like the consensus of the group was pro duplex, but anti shoebox duplex, you know, trying to avoid the stupid looking ones like you see on, you know, that stretch of Epps Bridge and the other duplex neighborhoods around. And we had talked about the single family design guidelines that exist in the code for, you know, you got to have 2 of the 6 things, dormers or gables or this and that, which seems like a solution. And then there's this Jonesboro thing with design guidelines specifically for duplex and triplex units to, you know, pursue the same goal we were talking about, trying to achieve well-designed duplexes that enhance the look of the streetscape and don't detract from it. And so I just wondered, what do y'all think about something along those lines? it talks about, it goes a little more in depth, I think, than what we have now about the choose two things from this list of 6. But in a way that that did not strike me as being cumbersome or burdensome to apply or requiring hearings board time or things like that, And so I was tempted by the idea of doing something, suggesting something a little bit more elaborate, in part just to address what is likely to be community concern. Some neighbors will be concerned about what if we get a bunch of shoeboxes on our street, which is a fair objection. And so having a more robust design standards document might short circuit some of that potential opposition.
Jeff, you're muted.
There we go. The idea of having a more detailed menu to choose from probably gives, if I was a developer, I would like to know that if I pick something off the list, it would be approved instead of having to come up with a concept and something like that. On the other hand, it's more work for everybody to come up with a list, and in a way, it's a little more restrictive in that if you can't do anything that's not on the list, or if you can't come up with an idea, or if it's just more complicated. I don't know if that makes it worse for a developer or not. And I think those two things would guide it. You would need to who's going to make the list, and how will it be received by the developer community is something that maybe we should explore before we make it a thing. We ought to ask, it might be an answer that has to come from outside of this group as to whether that's the desirable. It sounds good to me, but I don't know whether that's desirable to the people with money who build things.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with Jeff. Again, I guess sort of to the scope of what this committee can do. I too think this sounds like a really good idea, but we're just 5 people talking amongst ourselves on it. I think the most helpful thing we can do is sort of we've been educating ourselves a lot and bringing this research to the public forum where we do most of our work is the thing to do. So yes, I guess getting back to Matt's original question, yes, and also I don't feel like this committee is ready, is charged to make these kinds of decisions by ourselves. I want a larger discussion, and I want more direction from the mayor and commission about going about a duplex ordinance.
And yeah, piggybacking on Alice's piggyback, this is one of those things where we ought to put in the menu, this is what we think, but here's the 2 ways it can go. And it's up to somebody who gets paid more than I do to decide which of those paths to take.
Just remind you don't get paid anything at all, so.
I would add
$10 per meeting.
I was going to say, I mean, $10 is pretty.
I think that counts as a reimbursement, right?
It does. Yeah, you don't have to.
Yeah, that covers my gas from the living room up to the office here.
One thing that Mark did in his email that I thought was useful was he told us that of his attachments, he found that the duplex requirements from Orlando were most helpful, but the Jonesboro ones were short and easy. And so I would say that, again, kind of depending how much detail this essentially, letting the mayor and commission know we're interested in continuing to work on this. It could be that we express an interest of coming up with a set of short and simple guidelines that would ensure, as the Jonesboro document says, would articulate design principles in order to X, right? In order to, we would, I think, affirmatively sort of say what we want to see happen. You know, to encourage diverse design or something like that. But I think the idea of, you know, one thing that would be, I always like the idea of sort of giving people a bit to go on, because I think in the absence of information, people fill in the blanks. And so like with the idea of us communicating to the mayor and commission that we think this would be an important avenue to pursue without any information, and the public looks at that and the mayor and commission look at that with not much information. Whereas I think if we could sort of accompany with that, like, you know, something that would, you know, either showing the Jonesboro one as an example, or just simply stating what I said, that we would be, you know, that any such new allowance would be accompanied by these design guidelines. I think I just took a really long time to say something really simple, but I think you guys have figured that out about me. And unfortunately, I looked at the Jonesboro ones, but I didn't look at the Orlando ones, which are the ones Mark said was the most helpful. So I should do that.
If I could just make,
Yeah, good.
if I could just make one comment related to the question of the state law, I would suggest that you include a paragraph or a sentence in there urging the mayor and commission to explore improving that state code with the legislative delegation or with the appropriate legislative committees.
That sounds good, Jim.
Sure.
The other thing that kind of stuck out at me that Mark pointed out was him liking the term anti-monotony standards. I thought that was good. I like it when things are really plain like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I mean, it's like an English word. It's a Latinate root, but still, we all know what monotony means.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways the Jonesboro ones are good. Sort of looking at that as like the length. I agree with what you were saying, Jeff, about, I don't know. I mean, I guess, again, we're guessing, but I would think as a developer, I would much rather have a little bit more clear of an idea of what I know I can get approved versus having to put something together and guessing. And I think that's what we were talking about. You know, I still love this idea, and I can't remember if we included this in our memo about ADUs, but I do really like the idea of having, you know, using some sort of contest format or something, some way of coming up with, you know, a set of drawings essentially that are not only sort of guiding people who want to build ADUs to kind of fit with the spirit of what's trying to be done, but then also with the idea of being maybe like, you know, depending on siting of that ADU, these designs would be, you know, you can pretty much be guaranteed they would be accepted. I like that idea. It saves money, more work at the beginning, but especially with something like that, when you can get designers involved too, you know, that would be a cool project.
Speaking of ADUs, I should mention that I saw something online the other day in which a number of companies are now making available kit houses for use as an ADU or as an extra office in the backyard, etc. So we're onto a trend here.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there'll be more interest in ADUs, you know, depending on how things go in the next couple of years, if there's gonna be more people thinking maybe it would be nice to have a backyard office cottage.
Yeah, some of these kits you could buy for $15,000 and install on site yourself.
Yeah. Well, Matt, is there anything else you wanted to cover today? I guess a little bit we need to kind of hear what Brad has to say at the end of the work session tomorrow about how the committee will move forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. We have some process matters to discuss, and I think if we are able to get one or two more meetings, we should be able to wrap up something on the subject of duplexes. I'm looking at the Orlando document. It talks about duplexes and also courtyard home developments, which are, sort of akin to what we've been calling cottage courts. And that's all in their duplex document. And I think, as you said, Sarah, maybe sending just something concise to the mayor and commission saying, we think something like this would be great. And there's a couple of different ways we could go with this. And here are some examples to make it more concrete. And then they can give us feedback. And if they say, we love what Jonesboro did and how simple it is, or we love the Orlando thing, why don't you guys pick that up and run with it? Then they can give us a more specific charge on that subject going forward. But I think it's very important for us to encapsulate what we've done so far on that topic, and the sort of tentative recommendation that they, that Athens ought to legalize duplexes, but that we'd like a little bit more guidance from them, and in terms of whether whether they're interested enough in that to ask us to move forward on it and develop a detailed proposal. But yeah, I think it'd be good to talk tomorrow with Brad about this idea. It seems sudden to suddenly learn like that. That Brad thinks that they may need to withdraw staff support and we're done. And so I think we need to just discuss that.
And Matt, one quick question, or really for everybody. We keep talking about duplexes. I noticed these design guidelines for Jonesboro talk about duplex and triplex units. Do we want to, or I guess what I would like to, say is that I would like it to be worded so that we are, that we're not just being sort of given back the charge to talk about duplexes. I'd like to talk about duplexes, triplexes, and cottage courts. So maybe if we could word it in a little bit more of a general, I like the idea of being kind of specific, but at the same time, those three in particular, like I don't have anything sort of principle wise. I don't have a problem with duplexes, It's interesting to kind of read. I can't remember, it's a 4-plex or 6-plex in the Missing Middle Housing Guys book that they see as like the Rosetta Stone. They literally refer to it as such, as sort of just like a really super efficient use of land. So I don't know if we want to go that far, but I'm, it might be in the spirit of incrementalism, it might be better to talk primarily about duplex, triplex, and cottage courts. But it seems like we keep circling back around a little bit to cottage courts, but haven't quite tackled it. But anyway, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want me to sort of wrap things up then, Matt? Or
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we just, we'll talk tomorrow with the big group, and I think that kind of getting back to that sort of 2 points versus 3 points, if the idea of not adding our third, like when you guys are talking about this with the staff tomorrow, Robin, that if they don't want to bring up inclusionary zoning as a third point when we are 90 minutes into the 2-hour meeting, I get it. But certainly if the other group finishes in an hour, I think we would be prepared to, am I right about that, Matt? Like we'd be prepared to talk about inclusionary zoning if we had an hour, if we think that's what's needed. And alternatively, is there one of our smaller points, sort of making use of that work session? Does it make sense to cover one of our smaller points, like that we know we're going to recommend doing away with the minimum house size? Like, does that make sense, Robin? Or I guess just, basically like we could be flexible and ready to make use of that work session.
Yeah.
Depending on how quickly those first 2 points are.
Yeah. I mean, Brad is not, against having 3 points. I think he just has some cautions against it. So if they finish up within an hour, then I think it's definitely likely that it'll come up, especially depending on the comfort level of them, like how they feel discussing any of those points. If they've read the memo beforehand.
Yeah, we'll just be ready to go. Alice?
So I just want to make sure I'm hearing Robin correctly, voicing the staff position. It sounds like maybe staff is not real comfortable with having the inclusionary zoning conversation tomorrow night and would prefer a separate work session. I mean, it does. I know staff has to be ready to answer a bunch of questions that you can't even anticipate until we start to ask them. So yeah, you tell us if it's better that we just say, let's talk about these things, and then immediately tomorrow night schedule our next work session on inclusionary zoning. I'm happy to do that. I just want to make sure that it gets scheduled tomorrow night.
Yeah. To be totally honest, I think you should throw out, if there's the time allowed, then you should definitely come with those questions and let them happen and let's do it. I think staff is ready to tackle it if there's time.
Great.
I don't know if the time will be there, just based on the.
Thank you.
Okay, so tomorrow's work session starts at. Just want to make sure.
5:30.
5:30. 5:30. Okay, so we'll see everybody then. And Jim, I know there's been a little bit of a challenge getting emails, but it looks like you were on Rick's list to get the WebEx for tomorrow. Did you get it?
I received that. And apparently the invitation wasn't really on the thing. But what was really weird is that I got the thing in the morning and I responded to the, and for some reason, without my actually intending to do so, it got tossed into the deleted file. And then when I found it in the deleted file, there wasn't anything about the invitation.
Yeah.
Other than that there would be one.
Mine just didn't have that link
Yeah,
embedded
so
in it, or it had one of those .ics
files.
Yeah.
And I assumed that it had deconstructed the whole message and thrown it in different places.
Totally. We'll see you guys tomorrow at 5:30. Have a good rest of your evening.
Sounds good.
Have fun in
All right,
Chicago,
great.
Matt.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
I'll eventually disconnect if I can get I've got 2 mouses on the desk and the wrong one is
Oh no.
being used. I'll see you later. Take care.